Be me, Max, just a regular guy working a regular 9 to 5 office job. It's not a dream job. It's not a nightmare. It's a paycheck. You know the type. Gray carpets, beige cubicle walls, the gentle hum of computers. The kind of place where the highlight of your day is the coffee machine not being broken. Our team was pretty standard. There's me, just trying to get my work done and go home. Then there's Hank. Hank's been with the company since the dawn of time. He's seen managers come and go like seasons. He's got this permanently unimpressed look on his face and a coffee mug that says, "I'm silently correcting your grammar." He's a good worker, knows his stuff inside and out, but he has zero tolerance for corporate nonsense. And then there's Felipe. Felipe is younger, maybe a few years out of college. He's still in that phase where he tries really hard, wants to impress everyone, and is terrified of rocking the boat. Good kid, just a bit timid. The rest of the team was a mix of other people, mostly women, who were all perfectly fine to work with. For years, things were stable, predictable. We had our 1-hour lunch break and 2 15-minute coffee breaks, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. The rules were the same for everyone. Simple, fair. You do your work, you take your allotted breaks, you go home. It was a system that worked. No drama, no issues. Then she arrived. We got an email one day announcing our old manager was moving to another department and we were getting a new one. Her name was Nadia. The first day she walked in, you could feel the atmosphere shift. She had that look, the kind of look that says, "I have a lot of opinions and you're about to hear all of them." She called a team meeting first thing. We all shuffled into the conference room. Hank let out a deep, world-weary sigh before he even sat down. Nadia stood at the front of the room with a bright, forced smile. Instead of talking about our current projects or sales targets, she started talking about fostering a new era of synergy and empowerment. She used every buzzword in the book: safe space, paradigm shift, holistic approach. Hank was staring at the ceiling like he was asking God for the strength to endure. I just tried to look attentive while mentally planning what I was going to have for dinner. Then she said it, the line that was the harbinger of everything to come. "I want to dismantle the traditionally patriarchal structures that can make the corporate environment challenging." Felipe shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I glanced at Hank. He hadn't moved a muscle, but his eyes had narrowed ever so slightly. He was analyzing a threat. The meeting ended and we all walked out. Felipe was quiet. I asked him what he thought. He just shrugged and said, "She seems enthusiastic." Hank walked past us on his way to the coffee machine and muttered, "Enthusiastic is one word for it." The next day, a new mug appeared on Nadia's desk, bright pink with bold black letters. "The future is female." Okay, whatever. You do you. As long as the work gets done and my paycheck clears, I don't care what's on your mug. But it was a sign, a little flag planted on a newly conquered territory. The first couple of weeks were weird. Nadia would insert strange comments into work conversations. You'd ask a question about a client report, and she'd somehow pivot to talking about emotional labor. Felipe once made a joke about needing more coffee to survive the day, and Nadia told him, with a completely straight face, that humor is often a coping mechanism for male insecurity. The poor kid looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Hank just started communicating with her almost exclusively through email to avoid talking to her in person. The real change happened about a month in. One afternoon, Nadia sent out a meeting invitation. When I looked at the attendee list, I noticed something odd. It was only the women on our team. Me, Hank, and Felipe were not on the list. I pointed it out to Hank. He took a long sip of his coffee. "And so it begins," he said, not even looking up from his screen. The women went into the conference room. The door closed. We tried not to make a big deal of it. Maybe it was about some specific project they were all on. But it felt off. It was the first time in my years at that company that a meeting was segregated by gender. An hour later, they came out. They weren't talking loudly or anything, but there was a different energy. A few of them were smiling, kind of secretively. Nobody said anything to us. Work just continued as normal, until the next day. Around 10:30 a.m., one of our female colleagues, a woman who sat a few cubicles down, stood up. She stretched, announced, "Okay, time for my wellness break," and just walked away from her desk. I didn't think much of it. Maybe she had a doctor's appointment. but she came back exactly 15 minutes later with a drink from the cafe downstairs. An hour after that, another female colleague did the same thing, pushed her chair back, said something about needing to decompress, and vanished for 15 minutes. By the end of the day, every single woman on the team had taken an extra, unaccounted for 15-minute break. Me, Hank, and Felipe just took our normal coffee breaks and lunch. I asked Felipe if he knew what was going on. He just shook his head, looking confused. Maybe there was a new company policy announced in their meeting. Hank overheard us. He let out a short, sharp laugh that was completely devoid of humor. "Oh, there's a new policy, all right," he said. "Just not for us." The next day it happened again, and the day after that. It became the new normal. At any given time, at least one of the women on the team was gone on her special wellness break. The impact was immediate. Phones would ring at their empty desks, and we'd have to pick them up. Urgent emails would come in for them, and clients would get an auto reply. The workflow, which used to be a smooth, collaborative process, started to get choppy. I needed some figures from one of them for a report I was working on. I walked over to her desk, and she was gone. I asked another colleague where she was. "Oh, she's on her break," she said, without even looking up. "Her coffee break?" I asked. "No, her wellness break," she replied, with a slight emphasis on the word, as if I was an idiot for not knowing the difference. So I had to wait. My report was on hold. My own productivity was taking a hit because someone else had a privilege I didn't. It wasn't about the 15 minutes. It was about the principle. It was the blatant, unapologetic unfairness of it all. Felipe was getting the worst of it. Being younger, he often had to ask the more senior team members for guidance. But now, half the time he needed help. The person he needed was recharging her mental batteries. He was getting more and more stressed, falling behind on his tasks. I saw him one afternoon looking completely frazzled. He told me he'd been waiting for an hour to get a simple question answered because two different women he needed to speak with took their special breaks back to back. This couldn't continue. After about a week of this, I decided I had to say something. I wasn't going to be aggressive or demanding. I was going to be logical and professional. Hank warned me it was a waste of time. "You can't reason with a zealot," he said. "They don't speak the language of logic." But I had to try. Felipe was drowning, and I was getting tired of doing my job and parts of someone else's. I requested a one-on-one meeting with Nadia. I walked into her office and sat down. The pink mug was sitting on her desk, like a guard dog. I started calmly. I explained that I'd noticed a new brake system seemed to be in place. I told her that I fully supported the idea of employee wellness, but that the way it was being implemented was having a negative impact on the rest of the team. I gave her specific examples: the missed calls, the delayed reports, the extra burden on the male employees who weren't afforded the same privilege. I suggested that if we were going to have extra breaks, they should either be for everyone, or they needed to be scheduled in a way that didn't disrupt the workflow. I thought it was a perfectly reasonable, constructive approach. Nadia listened to me without interrupting. She had a placid, almost therapeutic smile on her face the entire time. When I was done, she nodded slowly. "Thank you for sharing that, Max," she said, her voice soft and condescending. "I hear that you're feeling a lot of pressure right now." My heart sank. I knew where this was going. She wasn't hearing my logistical points. She was psychoanalyzing me. "What you need to understand," she continued, leaning forward conspiratorially, "is that the female experience in the workplace is fundamentally different. It comes with a unique set of pressures and anxieties, largely due to the systemic patriarchal structures we're all forced to operate within." I just stared at her. "This initiative," she said, gesturing vaguely to the office beyond her door, "is a small but necessary step to create equity. It's about providing a tool for women to cope with the additional emotional labor they're often burdened with." I tried to interject. "But the work isn't getting done efficiently. It's not about feelings, it's about productivity and fairness." Her smile tightened. "I think the issue here, Max, isn't fairness. I think it's that you're experiencing what it feels like when the focus isn't centered on you for a change. That can be uncomfortable for some men." I was speechless. She had taken my legitimate workplace concerns and twisted them into some kind of personal failing, some evidence of my male toxicity. She was gaslighting me in corporate speak. "I would encourage you," she finished, her voice dripping with false sympathy. To use this as an opportunity for introspection, to become a better ally, to understand that true equality doesn't always mean treating everyone the same. The meeting was over. I had been dismissed. I walked back to my desk, my face hot with a mixture of anger and humiliation. Hank looked up as I sat down. He didn't even have to ask. The look on my face said it all. He just shook his head slowly, a grim, "I told you so" expression in his eyes. Felipe leaned over from his cubicle. "Any luck?" he whispered. I just shook my head. "No, it's worse than I thought. She thinks we're the problem." We were stuck. We had a manager who had implemented a discriminatory policy. We had tried to address it through the proper channels and had been shut down and insulted for our efforts. Going above her head to HR felt like a nuclear option. It was a huge risk. We had no hard evidence, no emails, no official documents. It was all unofficial. It would be our word against a manager who was an expert at spinning corporate narratives. They would see us as troublemakers. For the next week, the atmosphere in the office was thick with resentment. We, the men, were quiet. We just put our heads down and worked. We picked up the slack. We answered the ringing phones. The women continued taking their breaks, now with an air of smug validation. They knew we had complained, and they knew nothing had changed. They had won. Their boss had their back. The division in the team was no longer just an unspoken feeling. It was a chasm. We would see them leaving for their breaks, laughing and chatting, while we were stuck at our desks dealing with a problem they were supposed to be handling. It was demoralizing. It felt hopeless. Every day was a fresh reminder that we were being treated as second-class employees in our own office. The breaking point came during a particularly stressful project. We had a hard deadline for a major client. It was an all-hands-on-deck situation, or at least it should have been. In the middle of the most critical afternoon, two of the key women on the project took their wellness breaks. At the same time, we were missing crucial data that only they had access to. The entire project ground to a halt. We were calling their cell phones, but they weren't picking up. They were unplugging. The deadline was looming. Felipe was practically vibrating with anxiety. Hank looked calmer than I'd ever seen him. It was an unnerving, serene kind of calm. He was watching the chaos, the stress, the quiet panic. When the two women finally strolled back in, 20 minutes later, looking refreshed, Nadia was there waiting for them. I expected her to be furious. I expected her to ask where they'd been in the middle of a crisis. Instead, she just smiled and said, "Feeling better? Good. Now, let's get back to it." We barely made the deadline. We had to rush the last parts of the report. The quality wasn't what it should have been. We all stayed late that night to get it done. All of us except Nadia and the two women who had taken their breaks. They left at 5 p.m. sharp. As I was packing up my bag around 8 p.m., exhausted and angry, I looked over at Hank. He was just sitting at his desk, staring into the middle distance. Felipe was slumped in his chair, looking utterly defeated. This was it. This was the bottom. We walked out to the parking lot together. The night air was cool. For a few minutes, nobody said anything. Then Felipe finally spoke, his voice quiet. "I don't think I can do this anymore. This isn't right." "It's not," I agreed. "But what can we do?" We tried talking to her. She's got us cornered. That's when Hank stopped walking. We stopped and looked at him. He had a strange look on his face. It wasn't anger. It wasn't defeat. It was the look of a man who had just solved a very complex puzzle. He turned to us, a slow, cynical smile spreading across his face. "Cornered?" he said, his voice low. "I don't think so." He looked from me to Felipe. "She wants to play games with stupid rules," he said. "She wants to talk about wellness and mental health." He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. "Fine. Let's talk about our wellness." I didn't understand at first. "What do you mean? Like, go to HR?" "No," Hank said, shaking his head. "Much simpler than that. No complaints, no meetings, no arguments." He leaned in a little closer. "Tomorrow," he said, "we start taking care of our own mental health." The next morning, there was a different kind of tension in the air. It wasn't the heavy, resentful silence of the previous weeks. It was a quiet, electric anticipation. The three of us got in, nodded to each other, and sat down at our desks. Not a word was exchanged about the plan. We didn't need to. We knew what we were going to do. The morning ticked by as usual. Emails were sent, phones were answered. Around 9:45 a.m., one of the women stood up, stretched, and announced she was taking her wellness break. Nobody batted an eye. It was routine now. We waited. We let the rhythm of the office play out. Then, at exactly 10:30 a.m., Hank pushed his chair back. It made a loud, deliberate scrape against the floor. The entire office went quiet. Everyone looked at him. He stood up, put his hands on his lower back, and let out a theatrical sigh. "Well," he announced to the room at large, "the patriarchy is weighing heavily on me today. My mental wellness is in jeopardy. Time for a break." You could have heard a pin drop. The women stared at him, their mouths slightly agape. Felipe was trying and failing to hide a smile behind his computer monitor. I kept my face as neutral as possible, focusing intently on a spreadsheet I wasn't actually reading. Hank walked, not strolled, but walked with the confident pace of a man on a mission, right past Nadia's glass-walled office and out the door. Nadia watched him go, her eyes wide with disbelief. A storm was gathering behind them. It was a beautiful thing to witness. 15 minutes later, to the second, Hank returned with a newspaper under his arm, looking visibly more relaxed. He sat down, took a sip of coffee, and got back to work, as if nothing had happened. An hour later, it was my turn. I stood up. "All this typing is really harshing my vibe," I said calmly. "I need to go find my center. Be back in 15. More stunned silence. I could feel Nadia's glare burning into the back of my head as I walked away. I went downstairs, bought a bottle of water, and just sat on a bench outside, enjoying the fresh air. It wasn't about the break. It was about taking back a small piece of fairness. When I got back, Nadia was standing near my desk, pretending to talk to another colleague. But I knew she was waiting for me. Felipe took his break in the afternoon. He was more timid about it. He just quietly stood up and said, I also need a wellness break," and practically scurried out of the office. But he did it. That was the important thing. We were a united front. The next day, Nadia was ready for us. She called a team meeting, the real kind, with all of us present. She started by talking about professionalism and commitment to our team's goals. It was all vague, indirect language. Then she looked directly at me, Hank, and Felipe. "It has come to my attention," she said, her voice tight, "that some individuals are misinterpreting the spirit of workplace flexibility. Breaks are for rest and recharging, not for making a mockery of company policies." Hank raised his hand, as if he were in grade school. Nadia's eye twitched. "Yes, Hank?" "I'm a little confused," Hank said, his voice the epitome of sincere bewilderment. "Could you clarify which company policy we're mocking? As far as I know, the official policy is 1 hour for lunch and 2 15-minute breaks. We've all been adhering to that. This wellness break is a new initiative you introduced, and we're simply embracing it. Are you suggesting that wellness is only for certain genders? That seems discriminatory." Checkmate. The room was silent. Nadia's face went from pale to a blotchy red. She had walked right into his trap. She couldn't answer the question without either admitting her policy was discriminatory or validating our actions. She stammered for a second. I'm not, this meeting is over." She practically fled the conference room. The game was on. We continued our new routine. Every day, 3 extra 15-minute breaks were taken by the men. We were careful. We staggered them. We never took them at the same time. We did it by the book. The unwritten book that Nadia had authored. The effect on the office was catastrophic, and it was glorious. The productivity, which had already been suffering, now nosedived off a cliff. With both men and women taking these random, unscheduled breaks, the office was perpetually half empty. You couldn't get a project done because you'd be waiting for one person, and as soon as they got back, the next person you needed would stand up and announce they were going to realign their chakras. The irony was, the women on the team started to get annoyed. They had loved their special privilege when it was exclusive, but now, when they needed one of us for something, and we were off on our male wellness break, they got frustrated. I overheard one of them complaining that she couldn't finish a task because none of the guys are at their desks. The lack of self-awareness was staggering. Nadia was in a state of constant simmering rage. The seething was real. She couldn't officially punish us, so she resorted to petty, passive-aggressive warfare. She would walk past our desks and sigh loudly. She started micromanaging our work, questioning every decision, demanding constant progress reports. She would send us emails at 4:59 p.m. about urgent tasks that needed to be done before we left for the day. We just took it. We did the work. And we kept taking our breaks. Every time one of us stood up to leave, we would see her jaw clench. She started typing louder, slamming her mouse on her desk. It was a hostile work environment, and she was the one creating it. But we were untouchable. We were following her rule. We were weaponizing her own ideology against her. This went on for weeks. The office was a dysfunctional mess. Deadlines were being missed on smaller internal projects. Team morale was in the gutter. The camaraderie that had once existed was completely gone, replaced by a tense gender-based Cold War. We knew it couldn't last forever. Something had to give. The catalyst was, as we expected, a major client. We had a quarterly review presentation for our biggest account. It was a massive undertaking that required everyone's input. The week leading up to it was chaos. It was impossible to coordinate anything. We'd schedule a team sync, and 2 people would be on wellness breaks. We'd try to finalize the data, and the person with the master spreadsheet was off decompressing. Nadia was trying to herd cats, but the cats were all following a rule she herself had created. She was getting more and more frantic. The day before the presentation, we were in full-blown crisis mode. The numbers weren't adding up. The slides were a mess. At around 2 p.m., Felipe stood up. It was his turn. "I need to, take my break," he said. Nadia snapped. Her head whipped around and she yelled, right across the open office, "Sit down, Felipe! Nobody's going anywhere until this is done." The entire room froze. Felipe looked terrified, like a deer in headlights. But then Hank, without missing a beat, spoke up from his desk, his voice calm and clear. "Nadia," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "are you denying an employee a break for his mental wellness? After you yourself told us how important it is. Are you discriminating against Felipe because he's a man?" It was the same argument, but this time it was in public, in front of everyone. Nadia's face crumpled. She had been publicly called out on her hypocrisy, and she had no defense. She pointed a shaking finger at Hank. You are being insubordinate." "No," Hank replied, leaning back in his chair. "I'm just advocating for my colleagues' well-being, as you taught us to." Defeated, Nadia just turned and stormed into her office, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. Felipe took his break. We didn't finish the presentation that day. We came in early the next morning, the day of the meeting, to try and salvage it. It was a disaster. The slides were incomplete. The data was inconsistent. We were walking into a firing squad. The meeting with the client was a bloodbath. They tore our presentation apart. They asked questions we couldn't answer. They were angry, and rightly so. They were paying us a lot of money for a service we were clearly failing to provide. At the end of the meeting, the lead client looked at Nadia and said, "I've never seen such a poorly prepared presentation from your company. We need to seriously reconsider our contract." We returned to the office in a state of shock. We had just potentially lost our biggest client. Nadia didn't say a word. She walked straight into her office and closed the door. She didn't come out for the rest of the day. The next morning, the email arrived. It was from the regional director, the big boss from corporate who we saw maybe twice a year. The subject line was "Urgent Meeting Regarding the Client Name Account." The attendees were the regional director, the head of HR, Nadia, me, Hank, and Felipe. This was it. The final showdown. Hank came over to my desk. "Stick to the facts," he said quietly. "No emotion, no accusations, just the timeline. Let her be the one who sounds hysterical." We walked to the main conference room. Nadia was already there, sitting next to the HR head. She looked pale and nervous. She wouldn't make eye contact with us. The regional director was a no-nonsense older man named Mr. Harrison. He did not look happy. He started the meeting immediately. "I've just had a very unpleasant call with our most important client," he said, his voice dangerously low. "They are threatening to pull their account. This is a 7-figure loss. Before I make any decisions, I need to understand what happened. Nadia, your report says this was a result of a lack of team synergy and insubordination. Explain." Nadia took a deep breath and launched into her pre-rehearsed speech. She painted a picture of herself as a progressive manager trying to foster a supportive environment. She talked about her wellness initiative for female employees. Then she pointed at us. She said that we had resented this initiative, that we had reacted with toxic masculinity, that we had organized a work slowdown disguised as breaks to deliberately sabotage her and the project. She portrayed us as bitter, misogynistic villains and herself as the victim of a coordinated sexist attack. It was a masterful performance of twisting reality. When she was finished, the room was quiet. Mr. Harrison looked at her, then he turned his gaze to us. His expression was unreadable. "Mr. Harrison," I began, my voice steady, just as Hank had advised. "May I provide a different perspective?" He nodded. "Please do." I laid it all out, calmly, factually. "Several weeks ago," I started, "an unofficial policy was introduced by Nadia, granting an extra 15-minute break exclusively to female employees. I explained the negative impact this had on workflow and the increased workload it placed on us. We were concerned about productivity," I continued. "So I scheduled a private meeting with Nadia to discuss these issues and suggest a more equitable solution." I recounted our conversation, including how my professional concerns were dismissed and reframed as a personal failing on my part. At that point, I said, we were left with a choice. We could file a formal complaint, which would have created a hostile he said, she said situation with no hard evidence. Or we could operate under the assumption that the new wellness break policy, while unwritten, was intended for all employees who felt they needed it. We chose to believe in equality. I could see the HR head starting to take notes very quickly. So we began taking the same 15-minute wellness breaks, not in protest, but in participation. We adhered to the same rules. We followed the precedent that had been set. I looked directly at Mr. Harrison. The subsequent decline in productivity and the chaos that led to the failed presentation was not a result of our insubordination. It was the direct, predictable result of a flawed, discriminatory, and inefficient policy being applied to the entire team, rather than just half of it. We didn't break the system. We just revealed that it was already broken. I finished and leaned back in my chair. The silence was heavy. Nadia was staring at me, her face a mask of pure hatred. Mr. Harrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to the head of HR. "Is there any official record of this wellness initiative?" The HR head shook her head. "None. This is the first I'm hearing of it. Company policy on breaks is standard across all departments and has not changed." Mr. Harrison turned his cold, hard stare on Nadia. "So, let me get this straight," he said. "You, without authorization, implemented a new, discriminatory policy in your department. When your male employees raised legitimate concerns about its impact, you dismissed them. And when they logically decided to adhere to your own new standard, you accused them of sabotage to cover up the fact that your mismanagement cost this company its biggest client." Nadia opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She just deflated in her chair. He didn't need her to answer. "This meeting is over," Mr. Harrison announced. "Nadia, you will stay. The rest of you, you're excused. Get back to work." From this moment on, the only breaks recognized in this office are the ones officially listed in the employee handbook. For everyone. Is that clear? We all nodded. We stood up and walked out of the conference room, leaving Nadia alone to face the music. We didn't need to hear what happened next. We had won. The afternoon was quiet. Nadia's office door remained closed. An hour later, we saw her packing her things into a cardboard box. The pink mug was the last thing she put in. She was escorted out of the building by HR. She didn't look at any of us on her way out. The next day, our old manager was brought back to temporarily run the department until a permanent replacement was found. The first thing he did was call a team meeting. He just said, "Okay, everyone, let's get back to basics. The rules are the same for everybody. Let's just focus on doing good work." And just like that, the balance was restored. That afternoon, during the official 15-minute coffee break, me, Hank, and Felipe were standing by the machine. Felipe looked relieved, like a massive weight had been lifted off his shoulders. I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. Hank took a sip from his mug. He looked over the rim at us, a rare, small smile on his face. "See," he said, "sometimes the best way to fight a stupid system is to follow its rules to the absolute letter." And he was right. We didn't ask for special treatment. We just asked for fairness. And in the end, that's exactly what we got.